Welcome to the Powerhouse Project podcast, a podcast celebrating and empowering women and a place for us to share our stories. I'm your host, Lisa Laronde. Today, I'm excited to welcome Shelley Gray, the CEO for SkilledTradesBC. She's a strong advocate for equity and diversity and understands how to navigate the old boys club, something that I have in common. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shelley.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. Can't wait to have this conversation.
Oh, I'm excited. I know we met briefly in Calgary at the event that I was at, which was really cool. And then we had just a short time to speak at the on-site event. But I felt at that point in time that we had a lot in common, and I'm excited to just hear some of your experiences and see how we can actually continue to be advocates for women, particularly in the trades as well as in leadership. So I just wanted to start with, tell me a little bit about yourself and how did you get involved in the trades?
Yeah, it's interesting because it was something that I don't have a background in any way, shape, or form. And I really, though, love both the passion of the work within skilled trades and was kind of drawn to the organization after a long career in private sector and wanting to do something that sort of supported the public good versus just really trying to push towards, something that was profit driven, really. So that was kind of what kind of drew me to the work, and I've absolutely loved it. It has been a great run over the past 10 years, and really enjoy both having the ability to impact change and change for people, but do something that actually supports the economic viability in our province too. So it's been a really, really great run the past 10 years.
That's awesome. So because now I guess you're the only woman CEO for the skilled trades. So is it something that when you saw the job, you're like, hey, this would be perfect for me? Or was there some hesitation to apply for?
Oh, yeah. Isn't that how it rolls? I think really there was. I was the chief operating officer at the time when the role came open, and it took, I think, a female wise board chair who said, why don't you consider this role? And I said to her at the time, I'll do it on the interim, but it's not my role really in the long run. I don't see myself in it. And I think when I think about that now, because that was 5 years ago, like why was that? And I think it's a lot about that sort of that model of if you can't see it, you can't be it. Yeah. And I think when I looked around, because it had always been predominantly somebody who was male and who came with industry experience, from the skilled trades, and I had neither. And I think also at the time, if I'm honest, Lisa, I was a mom with two young boys who were 10 and 12, and back to that, if you can't see it, you can't be it. I'd never really seen a CEO who was also trying to thrive at being a mom, and those two things were really important to me to be able to do both well, or else I didn't want to do it. So it took a while for me to get my head around it. And, I really did look to other female leaders in those roles. And I reached out to many of them, even just for coffee, and just said, tell me about your experience in this role. And it took me a while. But, you start to go, hey, you know what, I think I can do this. And then it also becomes almost empowering, right? Because how can you do it? And because there's no mold, you get to make the mold, and then that kind of was like, oh, this is kind of fun.
That's awesome. And I think that I had the same issue. My kids were older, so I had a little bit more flexibility, but I won the top 100 recently, which was last November, and for the executive leadership. And so I was with a group of women, and having young children was a big conversation for a lot of them. And I would come back and I said, it was interesting. Some of them had, day nannies, night nannies, weekend nannies, because they couldn't balance everything. And I said, we've got to figure out how we balance that. And I talked to Robin Patak, so she's at P&G, and just interesting to hear different stories from women of how they navigated these waters. And she was lucky enough to be able to work 4 days a week. She had twin girls and then a third child, and so now and she says that worked for her, but I said and not all employers are going to do that, and not all women want that. But it's interesting to figure out how do you navigate those waters, and I think it's important that we find that community that you can reach out to people and find out what they did or how they navigated through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's incumbent on us as women leaders to talk about it more and normalize that more, and that it can be at times a struggle and a balance and messy and all those things, and all of that's okay. Yeah, and I think it's also about recognizing, like, there's two things. There's the what can we do to sort of change, the sort of the corporate environments, et cetera, in terms of policies and all of those things. That's all important. And then there's also the what can you do in the moment for yourself? And to me, it was really important to find, my inner circle of people, just to keep my own sanity at times, that you could kind of rely on, or, kind of be honest about where you're at with things or whatever, and really intentionally build that, right? Because yeah, it's tough, but I think you're right. I think we've kind of almost maybe a bit to disadvantage of young leaders said, you can do it all, but not sure, sort of shown the mess of it.
And I agree.
My house looks messy many times. Yeah.
But even how to navigate that? What do you do when
Yeah.
your kids are sick and you've got all these
Totally.
meetings, or people that
Yeah.
are relying on you, or how do you balance that somebody
Yeah.
else is, or how do you even not take on the guilt that comes with that,
Yeah.
that either you're going to miss some events. And I remember when I got my CPA, the executive director at the time was a gentleman, and he got up there and he was with his wife, and he's like, I'm missing my son's grade 12 graduation. I was like, I don't know if I would do that.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
can you not have a stand-in? Like, I know that you have requirements of the job, of things that you
Yeah.
have to do, but I think we have to change that
Yeah.
culture that says it's okay if,
Yeah.
that you have a stand-in. I'm
Yeah.
president of the Canadian Association of Women in Construction. And I said, listen,
Yeah.
I have a very busy job, and my job comes first at this point in time.
Yeah.
And then I have a daughter who's in Singapore, and so there's times that I will not be available.
Right. Yeah.
And that as long as we're in agreement
Yeah.
that I cannot attend some events that would be expected as the president, I'll take on the role, but under those requirements. So I think we need
Exactly.
to change
Yeah.
that narrative.
Yeah. And I think, though, too, what you just said, though, is important, Lisa, from the perspective is that then you start to model it.
Yeah.
So, like, when you have that conversation, you model it, then it helps, those listening to it to say, hey, well, maybe I can do that too, or to some, lesser extent or whatever. And it's kind of seeing those opportunities. Funny enough, I was on an equity, diversity, and inclusion committee, and it was with a broad bunch of different sectors together. But the meeting was at 8:00 in the morning, and I was looking around at the young moms it was on Zoom. It was during the pandemic that when the committee started, and I thought, like, this is ridiculous. Like, most of these people have kids, and so I said, especially for a diversity committee, like, can we not start it at like, it's ironic, right?
Yeah.
At 9 or at 10 or something, and a bunch of people went, yeah. But it took, sort of saying it, and then you kind of make that pathway that much smoother for those around you. And I think, it's important, and that goes back to that modeling it, and then it helps others. And I really try to be intentional in that, even in my own organization, about sort of saying, that works, but I have to leave by 4 because I have to pick up my son or whatever. Because then I think, okay, if they see me doing that, then they know they can do that, and that's for everybody. I mean, women or otherwise. But it's really important, and it's never lost to me. As you move up in roles, the importance of you have the obligation to give back and to be doing those things to pave it for others. Like, that's key.
Definitely. And that really hits home for me about, you have to model the behavior. So we have a parental leave, and I was saying, we can't just say that we offer this. We're in road construction, so
Right.
obviously a predominantly male-led industry, and so we had one gentleman take. I think he only took a month, but the back talk that was happening was shocking to me.
Wow.
And I started
Right.
to say, okay, this has to stop. We offer the benefit. It's important that
Yeah.
it's available to everybody,
Yeah.
and we have to start promoting that. So we have to actually say, hey, he's taking a parental leave. Isn't that great? This is what we should be doing. And then for my senior leadership team, I actually said to them, you need to go to your child's, whatever it was, graduation in kindergarten or holiday party or whatever it is, and then come back and show people pictures that this is what you did today. You took an afternoon off, and this is what you did, because otherwise it's really all lip service. And there was the one, I think he was a co-founder of Reddit. He married one of the Williams sisters, and he was the one to say they had a parental leave, and when they had their first daughter, he actually took it, and it was 3 months or something. He said it was the hardest 3 months of his life, but he actually said, if we put the benefit out there, I have to model the behavior, otherwise everyone's going to go, yes, it's a benefit, but you can't really take it.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic, and it's absolutely the truth. Yeah.
And it's interesting, the part about boards, somebody else was just telling me the same story, but it was the board meeting was in the summer and it was started at 8 o'clock. And she actually said the same thing. Like, I have to drop my kids off at camp, at summer camp.
Yeah.
If you want more women to be on boards or join committees, we have to be a little bit more accommodating in terms of the times that we offer them. And it's the same thing you said. It's a virtual board meeting. Does it have to be at 8, or it's a virtual meeting?
No.
It doesn't make any sense.
It
But
doesn't.
if we don't talk about it, and it's not like you think about it. You're like, oh, we'll get it done first moment of the day. Let's just get it, in and over with.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. Yeah, the modeling of it is really important in paving a pathway for others, for sure. Absolutely.
Yes, it definitely. And I think the more we talk about it, the more people understand that this stuff, continually exists. So do you still find, for women in the skilled trades, because you have, I think, very high numbers for apprenticeship, women in apprenticeship programs in BC.
Yeah, we do. It's grown. I mean, we've got a long way to go. So when I, say that we've had success, let's
look at Ontario.
Yeah, exactly. Let's keep it all in perspective for sure. But I think that there's something about momentum that certainly helps for sure. And I think, that's definitely what we have happening. So when I started, we were below 5% for women in trades. When we look at, and now we're close to 10%, so definitely higher numbers. And we've got certain trades like our electrical trades and things like that. We're actually starting to see, we're hitting a tipping point. They often talk about that 20% is your tipping point. So we're getting better. We're not there, but we've got a long way to go. And I think, that's when you start to see that culture change and those things kind of start to happen. So lots of work yet to do, like no doubt about it, but certainly getting a lot better. And I think, my own experience in terms of leadership and being in male dominated industries, et cetera, really has helped me put that front and center. It's not off the side of the desk. It's like, this is important. And I think, in the world we're living in terms of labor shortages and all those things, you can't negate, half the population in terms of, that piece. And I think what inspires me always when I think about that is there was this woman I met one day, and she had a young son and she was living paycheck to paycheck and a retail job. And then she'd gone into one of our programs, and, for the next, she was graduating and she'll make, over $100,000 a year for the rest of her life. And she said, this is a game changer. And she was just like so excited. And I was like, yeah, like what it did for her and her son and their life. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's what kind of keeps me going and gets me excited about the work that we do.
And so what did you do differently, or what advice could you give other provinces to be able to get their numbers up? I know Alberta also had very high numbers when they started their apprenticeship program.
Yeah.
So we've
done a couple of things. I think part of it was putting it very much as someone's job, so it wasn't off of the side of people's desks. Yeah. We actually hired a director for equity, diversity, and inclusion, and we really made sure that everything we were developing was also being reflected in things we were doing internally in the organization. So we had to walk the walk. And that was one of my biggest things from an integrity perspective, is like, we can't tell others to do it if we're not doing it ourselves. So we did a lot of work to make sure we were doing things that demonstrated that we were trying to be diverse and inclusive and advancing it as well, and then helping others lead others. So we did things like we have with the BC Women Trades, Be More Than a Bystander program, and it's for really targeted towards construction leaders and male leaders in trades. But we made all of our male leaders in our organization go to it, and it was like, it's going to be beneficial to everybody. So things like that really help to demonstrate the work. And then I think it comes back to a lot around, what gets measured gets done. So really kind of keeping on top of those numbers and making sure we were kind of focusing on that. And okay, are we seeing change? What do we need to do? Is this working? What else should we do? And kind of keep, at it that way. But it really, I think, started with having it be a role and a department within our organization versus a piece of somebody's job.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so do you have numbers for women? Are you retaining them in the trades? Because we've done a pretty good job of attracting women. The problem now is they get in and obviously, as you say, there's not a lot of women, so you don't have any representation, and you get in and it's basically a culture shock, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is the struggle, is that, there's the attraction, but then how do you retain? We do a couple things around with some of our partners around leadership programs for women in trades, things like that, mentorship, allyship. So more and more we try to use those programs as a way to help connect people, because I think if people have a safe space and kind of somebody that they can kind of reach out to, I think is really key and important. I'll never forget a story I'd heard from one individual that they talked about how much Starbucks had played a role in their life when they were in the early days of their career within the construction sector. And what it was the foreman on the job had realized that they didn't have a clean washroom for this individual. So they said, you whenever you want, there's a Starbucks across the street. Go over there, get yourself, have a break, and you can use their facilities. But they became their at the time kind of their safe space. So they come in, they would talk to them every day, have a conversation about their kids and whatever else. And she said, I would never have survived that really difficult job had I not had that. And she said, I will be a Starbucks customer for the rest of my life from that experience. And I have no shares in Starbucks. But it really, to me, just reminded me of how important, whether we're talking about women in trades, in corporate leadership, whatever it is, allyship, having people that you can reach out to and creating those environments for people is just so key and important.
Yeah, and I think when I started in my role, and I did a similar thing that you did, is I started to reach out to people that I knew in the industry, and there really wasn't a lot that I knew of at the time, and I really feel, I felt like I was on this journey by myself, and I started to doubt, I always say I'm a very confident person. I'm smart. I have business acumen. I'm very passionate what I do. I was so thrown off my game to land in this, and I had started in finance, so I knew all my people that I worked with. It was just shocking to me, this change that came over. And I remember talking to one of the owners, going, I don't understand, what's changed. And he was like, Lisa, you're a threat now. When you were in finance, they listen to you, maybe take your ideas, do whatever. But now that you're an operational executive, that now you're a threat, and now people want to it was so interesting. I had teams trying to get me fired. It was, I actually ended up going to an executive coach because I just lost my confidence. I was like, maybe this isn't right for me. Maybe I'm not the right person for the position. So I imagine somebody who, I think I have all this experience and I'm confident that I have all that self-doubt. I can only imagine walking onto a job site where you're the only woman, you're treated like shit for the most part, and you have no outlet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's where, similar to you, that sort of being the pointy end of a spear as you have in your career and I have in mine of being in different environments and different, industries and things like that. It really helps you kind of understand, the challenges that come with that and the challenges that, those people would face as well. And it's really, it is a challenge. I mean, I think things are getting better. If you think about even on the corporate side of things, things are getting better. I remember, when I started my career, I was talking to a female executive and kind of just trying to, it's kind of like that sponge and you're trying to, grab whatever you can so you can learn. And I remember them talking to me about the old boys club that existed and, how to navigate that. And they talked about, you're probably, if you're going to go to a meeting, kind of wear pants, don't wear a dress and all those kind of things. Right. And, I think about that now. And I think, the reality is some things have changed for the better. Corporate world, skilled trades, whatever you're talking about, things have gotten better. I think, we don't just acknowledge or try to find ways to work around an old boys club. I think in many cases, it's being dismantled and moved away. And I think sometimes men are our best allies and supports too. So I think that kind of thing has changed. I think we're much more accepting that people are going to show up as their authentic self and they're going to dress the way they dress, and that's fine. So I think there are lots of things that have changed over the years, but there's still a long way to go. As well. So it's kind of both good and bad, really, corporate or otherwise.
Yeah, and I talk to a lot of young women, and I still hear stories that sometimes they have wedding rings that they put on because that's a better option for them. Sometimes they take them off because that's a better option. Sometimes they, change their hair, and I just go, it would be nice to get to the point that you could just show up as your authentic self and be, accepted for who you are. And that's one of the things, I try really hard to model. And I think, sometimes people ask me for advice. I go, the unfortunate part is, you're not my age. You haven't gone through my trauma, and you don't have my ownership group. So you have to, it's difficult for me to say, do this in this situation. But I think if we start to speak up and we start to tell stories that, hey, I went through all of this and this is how I came out the other side. I think it just gives people that confidence that they can actually weather some of this storm. And I
Totally.
said, what I tried to do this year was try to highlight just women that wouldn't normally get out to do speaking engagements,
Right.
because it's
Mm,
interesting. We're a small network, but
right.
not everybody knows about us, which I
Right.
find is interesting. And then,
That is interesting. Yeah.
yeah, do you have like recommendations or
Yeah.
advice for how we get more women seen or celebrated or
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that's interesting that you say that because it is a challenge. And I think we're also so bad at sort of self-promotion
yeah,
or any
yeah,
of those things, which, inherently doesn't help at all. But just going back a second about the piece about the authenticity and how important that is, I think that's really where often when I talk to young leaders, I try to talk about too, in the sense of like, I think that's where your empowerment comes from.
yeah,
The more that you can be authentically, who you are and show up that way, because I think leadership can show up with a smile and warmth. I think leadership can show up with humor, and all of the vulnerability and all those things. And my something I've never forgotten was I was reading something after Hillary Clinton had lost the presidency. I don't want to get into politics, but it was really interesting from a women in leadership and politics perspective because it had talked about how it was after she had lost the election and someone had taken a picture of her walking with Bill Clinton in the woods. You may recall that after the election, and she stopped and did a selfie with somebody, and here was this woman who she had like no makeup on, and she was just kind of casually walking with her husband and their dog, and her approval ratings and favorability ratings with women actually went up, like skyrocketed from that photo
yeah,
versus who she was trying to be before. And just that piece to me, it said so much about authenticity, how important authenticity is, and really that how that helps to empower people. And I think back to your piece around how do we get more people to do that, I think it comes from that empowerment, helping people creating more space for leadership to look different in
yeah.
different ways. That it doesn't have to show up in a suit and all those things, and then really helping people kind of find their own power to come forward and to take on things, and really supporting them. And I think women these days are very supportive of one another, and I think you want people to shine and just go for it, so as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's very important. We just recently had a big announcement that we've been acquired by a private equity, and
Okay.
so I had my little speech. So this is a family-run business up until today, actually, and so I had my
Congratulations.
speech all prepared, and I go through it, and as I start to talk, and I was like, I started here, 10 years ago, and all of a sudden it's like this whole. I'm like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
not going to make it through this speech. It's like, and I looked at one of the owners. I'm like, this is way more difficult than I thought it was going to be. And I just said I really wanted to thank the family that they entrusted me with, their family business. One of the businesses have their family name, and but it really did well up this emotion. And but lots of people came up to me, and so obviously haven't seen me in that capacity,
Yeah.
and we're just like, wow, like you made me cry, Lisa. I was like, oh, I was like, it
Yeah.
was a very, very emotional time.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I think we have to we have to show that side of that's who we are. And I think that's what makes us good leaders is
Yeah.
we do have empathy and we
Yeah.
do have, we do have feelings
Yeah.
and I'm not afraid to make a decision and change my mind. And I tell people
Yeah.
that all the time. I need
Yeah.
a senior leadership group that's going to challenge me. I don't want you walking out of my office, rolling your eyes and going, my God, that's going to blow up. I would
Yeah.
rather you say,
Oh, totally.
challenge. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, I
Yeah.
reserve the right to say, no, I'm going to take this route anyway.
Yeah.
But that's what I think makes us good leaders and good members of a team is to be able to
Yeah.
challenge one another. And
Yeah.
because otherwise, I always say it about diversity. Do you want to have everybody that's just going to agree with what you say?
No.
Like, we'll
Yeah.
never make good decisions, and you'll never know if you made a bad decision. I mean, obviously, when you make a bad decision when it doesn't turn out right, but it would just be. I just personally don't understand that, why you wouldn't want to have more opinions and have people
Yeah.
challenge you and make you think about things and go, hey,
Yeah.
I didn't think that was an option. We have, as part of my executive team, we have our vice president of IT, and he brings such a different perspective that I
Yeah.
wouldn't have thought. And he
Yeah.
just brings a huge amount of value.
Yeah.
And so I think
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, I agree. It makes a huge difference getting the diversity. And I think
yeah,
women are really good as leaders to be able to bring that out in others
yeah,
and to create an environment around that kind of, fosters that culture of lots of diverse opinions and such. It's interesting when I first started this role because I had seen, my predecessors and how they had managed some of the challenging conversations, because it can be a very divisive industry in terms of how skilled trade should be done. And, people have very strong opinions at times.
Yeah.
But what I recall was there was a lot of sort of, fist pounding, right? It was like, well, I want this, well, I want this. And that was, for me, I thought, like, how do I even approach this? Because I'm never gonna, pound my fist on the table about something. That just wasn't who I was or my style. And like, how do I do this differently? And so for me, I really spent a lot of time trying to just build relationships first and get to know people. And we talk about, their kids and vacation and all these other things, and kind of get that relationship trust strong enough to then have conversations. And so now we have conversations, and many times they disagree with where we're going or what we're doing or what our priorities are. But you know what, at the end of the day, we have, there's respect. And they'll still call me the next week, and we can have a great conversation about something else, and it's perfectly fine. And I think for many cases, even with some of the male counterparts I have within industry, it challenged them to find new ways to have those conversations too, and share diverse opinions. So I think we've actually all benefited from it, and I think that's the stuff where the secret sauce of women in leadership is actually really, really good, and I think it can be really helpful.
And I agree. And I think the more that we have representation, because I do think that that's part of our problem, I think we need more women on boards and committees and advocacy groups, because I do think that that's the problem. That, do you have any advice on how we can get more women on boards? Do you think it's a matter of just talking about it, or do you think that it's just we don't have the extra time?
I think it's about creating space and being intentional about it. I was just on one of the boards that I'm on. We were just talking recently about kind of skill sets for some new positions, and I flatly called out kind of the lack of diversity on our board in many respects. And just it's something made people a little uncomfortable for a second, and then we had a good conversation about how to do it. I think the other thing that's really important to do is that when you do see somebody come onto the board, is really kind of reaching out your hand and kind of helping to mentor or guide them. I'd gone to an event where there was a board member for a new board member to something I'm part of. They were at that meeting, and then they were joining the next day for the meeting, and I could tell they were nervous and kind of a bit out of their element and all those things. And I sent them an email and said, hey, if you need anything at all or have any questions, dumb questions, whatever, don't feel hesitate to reach out. And they replied back and they said, I actually have some questions. So, they really appreciated it. And some of it was like, well, what do you wear to the board dinner? Like, do I wear you show up in a suit? Do I, even things like that. And so it's like creating space for, like, that's not a silly question. Like, we have those moments, and it's okay. And so I think it's both trying to get people on to boards and creating space for them. But I think also, it doesn't have to be a formal mentorship. I mean, just to reach out and say, if you've got a question, don't hesitate. Because I'm sure, Lisa, you found throughout your career, and I've certainly found it. I mean, if you say to somebody, hey, can I, buy you a cup of coffee somewhere close to where you work or live for half an hour, there's very few and far between people that are going to say no. And quite frankly, if they say no, they're probably not worth your time anyway. So I think, just reach out to people and don't be afraid. I think, there's an onus on people to do that, or, on young leaders to do that. And there's an onus on those of us to also, open doors and create space for it as well. So it's kind of on both sides, really.
And I'm when I do any talks, and I just say to people, connect with me on LinkedIn. I can guarantee you, if you're a woman, I will connect with you, and I will give you the time. And it may be in September, but I will give an hour of my time, because I just think you're right. It's so important that we actually we just give back. I'll go back to, I really didn't have anybody that I could turn to just have a conversation. I tell the story, Jenny Coco, she was a co-owner of Coco Paving in Ontario, that actually there's some legal issues now, but she was, and I tell the story about how trying to get to her. So it was her brother and her that ran the construction company. Everybody knew Rocky's contact information. Nobody knew Jenny's. I actually found a PM that knew her EAs. So I went through the EA, just said, this is who I am. This is my new role that I'm in. Just wanted to know if I could meet her. It was just at the very beginning of COVID. But it was a hands down yes. Some of her advice, I wouldn't, she was the one that, she had this really hard, long road that she traveled, and I should work really hard and long. And I was just like, Jenny, we got to change this. Like, I shouldn't have to do all that to be in my role. But she gave me some really, really good advice. But I always go back to, she gave me that. I mean, I had multiple hours with her, but it was really, really nice just to have somebody that could give me advice, just listen to me, tell me that, I was doing the right thing. Here's some things that would work, or
Yeah.
here's some of the challenges that I might encounter.
Yeah.
But I have to laugh too about the woman who asked you what to wear for the board dinner. So I was recently elected to the Ontario Road Builders Association. I'm the only woman on the board. And I think there's only been
Not for
4 of us.
long.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's only ever been 4 women ever on the board. And so I was just looking at the other day, the picture, and I think there's like 27 of us. There's a lot of us. But I was like, oh my gosh. Luckily I was wearing a navy blue suit and a blue shirt, because I'm center, but everybody's in like dark suits. So I would, if you can imagine, if I was wearing, a pink dress or whatever, I would have just, it would have just, not that I care, but it would have been really, really obvious. And, sometimes I think you just don't want that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree. And then I think there's, times especially in roles like when you're on that type of board where you got to nudge, right? And you got to keep nudging. And you can do it, I think, as you get older, or I don't know, not older, wiser. You get better at knowing how to do it in a bit of more of a playful manner at times, in a way that just, kind of like, well, what can we do differently here? And
the one talk, because we did the same thing. We did it was called Equity 101 training. So everybody that gets hired under one of my companies goes through it's all mandatory training now. Because what I learned through that training, where I was doing all this talking about being a woman in construction and underrepresented group, I learned that I actually come from a place of privilege, that I have a voice, and I should be using my voice for people that don't have voices. And then I talked to a lot of my male colleagues about it, saying, like, I come from a place of privilege, and I don't, like, there's certain things I don't know, and there's certain missteps that I make. So, we just have to start talking about it and learning, and then not repeating it. And then we can be part of the change.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, to your point, even with that, making sure that we help, our male allies, et cetera, understand what their role is or what they can do. Because I do think at times, I've worked with some who they're happy to do something, they don't know what to do. So sometimes it's us helping them understand, this would be helpful, or can you look at trying to do these types of things, and just helping them create the space. Because I think it's sometimes, it's awkward for them in terms of trying to, what do I do, and how do I make sure I do it in an authentic way that's actually, beneficial. And
the rules have changed. And so I think that's exactly, we have to figure out how we navigate it. I know that they put in Ontario skilled trades as part of the junior or the elementary curriculum, but they didn't give the teachers any tools to be able to teach it. So I go, we have all these like great ideas. We just have to actually help each other navigate and continue to tell our stories. I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
I just think it's very cool. So we usually end our podcast with the question is, what advice would you give your younger self?
What advice would I give? Yeah, that's a hard one. I think, for me, it's about, recognizing that you can have it all, but you're not going to necessarily have it all at the same time. And it's going to be messy at times and all those things. And it's okay. I think I wish I would have just, told myself it's going to be okay a little bit more. I think you think you have to know everything. You think you have to do everything perfectly. And it's like they always say that when women look at job descriptions, they feel like they have to have everything, or else like I can't apply. And I think I would have just delved into the messiness a bit more and been okay with it. And I really hope, I'm starting to model that, I hope, for other, people within my own organization and elsewhere, to say, you're going to see me be, a CEO and a mom, and it's going to be at times messy and disorganized, and it's all okay. And and just go for it.
That's awesome. Yeah. Shelley, thank you so much for sharing your stories with us, with our listeners today. Please continue to inspire women, and please let's continue to have women pursue careers in the trades. I think it's so important.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me today.
You can learn more about today's guest in the show notes and at powerhouse-project.com. If you know of any women in leadership or the skilled trades who should share their stories with us, please send in a voice note or a message on the website. Follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you so much for listening.